Reports are emerging that a rift is widening amid growing tension between Prince Harry and King Charles.
King Charles entered the private court chamber, believing he was about to witness the final dismissal of an old royal dispute. Instead, a judge opened a sealed evidence file, lifted a yellowed decree bearing the Queen Mother's private mark, and named Prince Harry as the man who had concealed it. The king did not protest. He simply gripped the edge of the table as the truth struck him. His own son had hidden a command capable of rewriting the monarchy's internal balance. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles felt every eye turned toward him and stared at the document. The royal court, the legal body examining the family's private dispute, had confirmed the impossible. Harry had secretly held a forbidden decree issued under the Queen Mother's authority. That command ordered that private royal powers must never pass automatically to the reigning monarch. Those powers covered residences, inheritance records, letters, and guardianship decisions for heirs. If the decree was valid, the king had exercised control over areas that had never fully belonged to him. William sat beside his father and watched shock harden into anger. Harry had known about the decree through years of conflict and family silence. He had watched the monarchy defend decisions the hidden command might have restricted. Across the chamber, the Duke stood pale but steady, his hands locked, as though he had prepared for this moment. Charles turned toward his younger son. "How long?" he asked. Harry did not hesitate. "Long enough to know what it would destroy." The answer struck hard. The king heard accusation, while William heard a warning. Neither knew whether Harry meant the decree would destroy the monarchy, expose the palace, or shatter what remained between them. The court clerk rose and read the document's most dangerous sentence. No sovereign could alter the Queen Mother's protected arrangements without the written agreement of two direct descendants named in a sealed appendix. An appendix is an attached section of extra instructions, and this one could identify the only people empowered to restrain the monarch. Silence tightened. The appendix remained unopened. No one knew whether William had been named, whether Harry held that authority, or another royal had been chosen. As Charles lowered himself into his chair, William noticed something worse. His brother was no longer watching the judge. He was staring at a second envelope marked with the name of their late mother, Diana. The decree had stunned the king, but the expression on Harry's face revealed something even more unsettling. He had not hidden it merely to protect himself. The legal language was devastating, but the greater wound was personal. Charles was no longer looking at a constitutional problem. He was looking at the son who had allowed him to rule, without knowing that an older authority stood silently against him. William saw betrayal. Harry saw survival. And between them sat the memory of two women, Diana and the Queen Mother, whose decisions still carried enough emotional force to divide a father from both of his sons. Charles believed authority survived only when trust survived with it. The hidden decree threatened more than control over family matters. It suggested the monarchy's deepest secrets had not been transferred honestly. A decree is a formal written command, and this one limited powers he had assumed were his. For the king, that wounded the system he had spent his life defending. Harry carried a different fear. He said he discovered the document among private materials linked to Diana, and believed palace officials would suppress it if surrendered. During the recess, Charles entered a side room without aids, removed his glasses, and placed them on the table. "Why did you never come to me?" he asked. The question was quiet, but the pain behind it was not. Harry held his father's gaze. Through a recorded court statement entered into evidence, he said he had once tried to warn the palace and was treated like an unstable outsider. William heard those words from the doorway and stepped inside. The prince accused his brother of using their mother's memory to excuse deliberate deception. Harry fired back that silence had already been used against Diana once, and he would not allow it again. The room tightened around them. Harry then revealed, through the same documented statement, that the decree carried a handwritten addition made after Diana's death. The Queen Mother had warned that a future king might become surrounded by advisors who valued control more than family loyalty. Charles flinched at the implication. William did not. Another instruction cut deeper. Camilla's name did not appear in the decree, yet any future consort was barred from entering the protected archive without approval from the named descendants. A consort is the spouse of a reigning monarch, and that restriction meant the queen consort could be excluded from records, shaping the family's most sensitive decisions. Harry finally turned to William and said the real reason he concealed the document began years earlier, during a private royal ceremony, when a courtier tried to remove Diana's letters from a locked memorial cabinet. To understand why Harry chose secrecy over surrender, the family would have to return to the night when one locked cabinet turned suspicion into open defiance. The secret did not begin in a courtroom. It began years earlier inside a quiet Windsor corridor after a memorial service for Diana. Guests had departed, the candles had burned low, and Harry was preparing to leave when he saw two palace officials standing before a cabinet containing his mother's private letters. One held a key. The other held an unsigned removal order. Within minutes, Harry would make the decision that eventually left his father stunned before the court. Harry had spent the evening beside Charles and William, marking the anniversary of Diana's death in a private memorial ceremony attended only by family and senior household officials. A memorial ceremony is a formal gathering held to honor someone who has died, and this one mattered because it was supposed to protect her memory from politics, publicity, and palace control. The locked cabinet held letters exchanged between Diana, the Queen Mother, and trusted advisors. Both brothers had been promised those papers could never be moved unless they were present together. Silence sharpened after midnight. Harry watched Sir Alistair Vane, the deputy keeper responsible for private royal records, turn the key and reach inside. Beside him stood another official holding an instruction with no signature. The Duke stepped forward and demanded an explanation. Sir Alistair froze, then claimed the order had come from the highest household. When Harry asked whether that meant Charles, the courtier refused to answer. William arrived moments later and found his brother blocking the cabinet. The prince urged him not to create a public scandal inside Windsor, but Harry heard restraint as surrender. He accused the officials of stealing Diana's voice while the palace was still pretending to honor her. William caught his arm and warned that anger without proof would only be used against him. Harry returned to the cabinet when the officials withdrew. Behind one of Diana's letters, he found the forbidden decree folded inside a plain cover. A handwritten note rested against it. "Keep this beyond the reach of anyone who confuses the crown with ownership." The crown meant the monarch's official authority, but Diana's warning drew a brutal line between serving that authority and claiming personal control over family history. Fear made the decision for him. Harry removed the decree before the officials returned and later placed it inside a private security box, registered under a legal alias. He believed disappearance was the only protection left. Years later, court security records revealed that Sir Alistair met privately that same night with a member of Charles's household. Harry's secret had begun as an act of protection, but when Charles learned that his own household might have searched for the decree, protection and betrayal became impossible to separate. The courtroom recess should have cooled the anger. Instead, it removed the last barrier between father and son. Charles ordered the private consultation room cleared, waited until the door closed, and turned toward Harry with a fury more wounded than loud. William remained beside the window, trapped between them. Then the king placed both hands on the table and delivered the accusation that changed the conflict forever. "You let me rule blind, while carrying the truth in your pocket." Charles believed the hidden decree may have invalidated decisions involving royal archives, family residences, and access to private papers. Those choices mattered because they shaped who controlled the family's history and who could enter spaces tied to future heirs. Harry insisted the command never challenged the public crown or constitutional government. The crown meant the monarch's official authority within the state. While the decree restricted only private family powers, the Queen Mother feared might be abused. Anger broke through restraint. Charles stepped toward his son and demanded the location of every copy. Harry refused. He said he would surrender nothing until his father promised that Diana's correspondence would never again be moved in secret. The king stared at him, stunned that a condition was being placed upon his trust, yet the duke did not lower his eyes. William suddenly pushed a chair aside. The prince accused his brother of deciding alone what their mother would have wanted, as though grief had given him exclusive ownership of her voice. Harry answered that William had remained protected inside the institution, while he had been forced beyond its walls. The accusation wounded the future king because it turned duty into complicity and loyalty into silence. Harry then revealed, through a recorded statement already submitted to the court, that 3 authenticated copies existed. One lay before the judge. Another was held by an independent solicitor, a lawyer trusted to protect documents without palace control. The third carried instructions to be released if he was detained, publicly discredited, or prevented from speaking. Charles went still when his son produced the unsigned removal order from the Windsor cabinet. The paper carried no royal signature, but it bore an internal code once used by the king's former private office. That detail mattered because it connected the attempted seizure to people close enough to act in his name. William took the order and studied the markings. His expression changed. He recognized the initials of an advisor now sitting on the council that would decide whether the decree was legally binding. The confrontation had exposed the family's anger, but the next battle would be fought by the people who understood that controlling the decree meant controlling the limits of the king himself. Behind the courtroom drama stood a smaller and more dangerous struggle. 5 people now held the power to decide whether the Queen Mother's decree was a private wish, an enforceable family command, or a direct restriction on royal control. Charles could not order them to dismiss it. Harry could not force them to accept it. Yet one advisor sitting at the polished council table had already tried to make the document disappear, and William knew exactly where to look. William paused outside the chamber and read the coded removal order again. The Family Instruments Council was a private royal body created to interpret sealed decrees, trusts, archive protections, and inheritance instructions. Its ruling could not change Britain's constitutional monarchy, the system in which the sovereign reigns under law and elected government. But it could control private estates, heirlooms, restricted letters, and records capable of shaping the family's future. The prince traced the initials at the bottom of the page and felt certainty settle into anger. Lord Pembroke, a long-serving advisor trusted by Charles, had approved the attempted transfer from Diana's memorial cabinet. That mattered because Pembroke now sat among the 5 people judging whether the same decree should survive. William entered without speaking, but the advisor saw recognition in his face. Charles watched through a glass partition as Pembroke argued that the Queen Mother's command belonged to another age. The king had defended that man through years of internal disputes, believing loyalty flowed both ways. Now Pembroke refused to meet his eyes. Harry sat nearby and watched his father absorb the betrayal, while William understood that the case was no longer only about his brother's secrecy. The room tightened when a handwriting specialist presented a documented forensic report. She confirmed the decree, the appendix seal, and the later handwritten amendment were authentic. An appendix is an attached section containing extra instructions, and this one had remained sealed because its names could shift control away from the monarch. The council could no longer dismiss the document as rumor, invention, or emotional manipulation. Silence followed the breaking seal. William was named first. Harry was named second. Together, the brothers held the joint approval required before any protected arrangement could be changed. Neither could act alone. Neither could be ignored. Then the clerk reached the final line. If the brothers failed to agree, temporary authority would pass to Princess Anne. The doors opened. Anne entered carrying a sealed letter of her own before the council made its ruling. For years, William and Harry had stood on opposite sides of the palace divide, but the decree had now chained their decisions together and placed Anne between them as the final safeguard. The ruling had not yet been delivered, but the palace was already changing. Archive doors were sealed. Residence transfers were suspended. Advisors who had spoken with absolute confidence began deleting appointments from their schedules. At Clarence House, Camilla received a single-page notice stating that her access to the Queen Mother's private records had been frozen. She read it twice, lowered herself into a chair, and understood that a decree written decades earlier had just reached directly into her life. Camilla remained alone after her secretary left and folded the notice in half. The court had issued an interim preservation order, a temporary command preventing protected documents, jewels, residence records, and private family files from being moved while the decree was examined. That mattered because Charles had planned to combine several archives and transfer selected rooms at Royal Lodge and Clarence House. Now every decision stopped, and every stop decision exposed how much power the hidden document could remove. Charles entered quietly and found his wife holding the paper. She asked whether he had always suspected the Queen Mother wanted to limit a future consort. The king could not give her comfort. He admitted he had heard of protective arrangements, but advisors told him those restrictions had expired. His silence hurt more than the answer. Camilla had spent years believing she had finally been accepted into the family's inner history, yet the page placed her outside it. Anne's sealed letter deepened the wound. Through a documented statement read before the council, she confirmed that the Queen Mother had warned her that affection, succession, and possession might one day become dangerously confused. Succession meant the order in which the crown passes from one heir to the next, but the warning reached beyond titles. It feared that love, inheritance, and ownership could become weapons inside one family. Anne then revealed that Harry had contacted her months before the case. She refused to conceal the decree, but she urged him to submit it through an independent court rather than return it to palace custody. Charles heard that choice as another secret kept from him. William confronted his aunt. The prince demanded to know why she allowed his brother to prepare legal action in silence. Anne did not retreat. She told him that Harry no longer trusted the institution, while William trusted it too much. Then she gave one instruction: the brothers must meet without Charles, lawyers, or advisors, and decide what the decree would become. The palace machinery had begun to crack, yet the true turning point would not come from a judge or council. It would come when two brothers finally sat alone, with nothing left to hide behind. William entered the small Windsor sitting room first, and removed his phone from his pocket. Harry arrived moments later, and did the same. No aides stood outside. No lawyers waited with prepared language. Between them lay the forbidden decree, Diana's handwritten note, and 20 years of resentment neither man could explain in public. For several minutes, they said nothing. Then William touched the corner of their mother's letter and asked the question he had avoided since the courtroom opened. "Did you ever trust me with this?" Harry held his brother's gaze and answered with painful honesty. Anne had ordered the meeting without advisors, lawyers, or household officials, because the brothers alone had to decide whether to enforce, amend, or surrender the decree. An amendment is a formal change made to an existing document, and here it mattered, because one altered sentence could weaken protections created for Diana's letters, family records, and the private inheritance of future heirs. William wanted stability. He feared that exposing every old dispute would turn the monarchy's wounds into public weapons. Harry wanted safeguards strong enough to stop secret removals, hidden orders, and decisions made in the name of duty. The Duke admitted he had not trusted the future king because he believed his brother would always choose the institution first. William did not interrupt. The accusation hurt because it reduced years of loyalty, pressure, and sacrifice to a single cold judgment. Then the prince slid Diana's note across the table. He confessed that Harry's secrecy made him feel their mother's memory had been taken from him again. Neither of them, he said, had the right to own her intentions alone. Silence returned, but this time it was softer. Harry unfolded the decree and discovered a second page attached beneath the sealed cover. Through the authenticated court copy, they read that its purpose was not to weaken the sovereign. It was designed to force cooperation whenever family heritage became vulnerable to personal pressure. William finally proposed a binding compromise. Both brothers would enforce the protections, transfer custody to an independent archive board, and prevent either household from using the material for public retaliation. An archive board is a neutral group responsible for preserving records and controlling access, which meant no palace office, royal spouse, or private advisor could dominate the collection. Harry agreed, but on one condition. William had to tell Charles the truth himself, without softened language and without placing all blame on his younger brother. William accepted, knowing silence had already cost them enough. For the first time, the decree no longer stood between William and Harry. It stood behind them as they prepared to face their father together. By sunrise, the secret belonged to the world. Broadcasters abandoned their scheduled programs. Newspaper presses restarted before dawn. Outside Buckingham Palace, tourists stood beside royal watchers, who had arrived carrying photographs of the Queen Mother and Diana. Yet one image came to define the entire day. Charles leaving the courthouse alone, pausing beneath the stone archway, then turning back as William and Harry emerged together several steps behind him. Charles felt the judgment follow him beyond the courtroom. The court had publicly confirmed the decree as authentic and legally binding within the royal family's private estate and archive structure. That structure controlled family-owned residences, historic papers, heirlooms, and restricted correspondence rather than the public powers of government. The distinction mattered because the ruling restrained private royal control without weakening the constitutional authority of the sovereign. Palace officials released a carefully written statement accepting the decision, confirming the creation of an independent archive board, and promising full compliance. An archive board is a neutral group that protects records and controls who may access them. The message sounded calm, but the king knew the public story was harsher. One son had deceived him, while both sons had forced limits upon him. Charles refused the prepared statement waiting beside the car. He sat in silence during the journey back to Windsor, wounded by headlines that reduced years of family pain to betrayal and defeat. Harry watched the same coverage from another vehicle. Several front pages called him reckless, disloyal, and calculating, while William was praised as the brother who had rescued the monarchy through compromise. William rejected that imbalance. The prince ordered palace communications to acknowledge Harry's role in preserving the decree and bringing it before an independent court. He understood why it mattered. If his brother carried the blame alone, their agreement would become another weapon, and the fragile trust built behind the closed door would collapse before nightfall. One newspaper captured the crisis with brutal simplicity. Beneath a full-width photograph of Charles walking ahead of his sons, the headline declared, "The document that forced them to stand together." At the Victoria Memorial, a woman placed white roses beside Diana's photograph. Within an hour, a crowd gathered, calling not for the monarchy's destruction, but for its private history to be protected from manipulation. That evening, Charles summoned William and Harry to Windsor. He arrived without Camilla, secretaries, or legal papers. The country had already chosen its symbol of the crisis, but behind the closed Windsor door, Charles still had to decide whether he saw two disloyal sons, or two men who had protected something he failed to understand. Charles did not enter the room as a monarch, preparing to issue commands. He entered as a father, carrying the weight of what secrecy had done to all three of them. William rose first. Harry remained seated until their eyes met. On the table rested the decree that had humiliated the palace, exposed years of mistrust, and forced the family to confront the difference between royal authority and personal ownership. Then the king closed the door and delivered his verdict. Charles accepted the court's decision without conditions. He signed an order transferring the Queen Mother's protected records to an independent board, supervised jointly by William, Harry, and Anne. An independent board is a neutral group that controls documents without answering to one royal household. The arrangement mattered because it protected private letters, inheritance records, and historic family material from being quietly moved or used as personal weapons. The decree remained binding, but the brothers agreed it would never be used to challenge the lawful constitutional role of the sovereign. Constitutional authority means the official powers exercised by the monarch under Britain's laws and democratic system. Harry also promised that the records would not be sold, published for profit, or used to attack the family. William accepted the same restriction. Charles turned toward his younger son. He said hiding the document had wounded him more deeply than the judgment itself. The king did not excuse the deception, yet he admitted that palace officials had created a world in which Harry believed concealment was safer than trust. The Duke lowered his eyes, hearing acknowledgement without receiving complete forgiveness. William faced his father next. Charles warned him that becoming king must never mean inheriting every silence that had damaged their family. The prince nodded slowly. He understood that loyalty was not always obedience. Sometimes protecting the monarchy required resisting the people who claimed to defend it. Charles then confirmed through a documented resignation notice that Lord Pembroke had stepped down. The unsigned removal order had come from advisors seeking to consolidate archive control without the monarch's informed approval. That cleared the king of ordering the attempted seizure, but not of trusting powerful people without questioning their motives. Harry removed the final private copy of the decree and handed it across the table. Charles did not destroy it. He placed it beside Diana's letter and said, "They protected this because they feared we would stop listening." No miracle followed. Harry did not return to royal duty, and every broken bond was not restored. Yet a narrower peace survived. Charles kept the crown. William accepted restraint. Harry surrendered secrecy. Anne became the guardian of their shared history. The forbidden decree did not bring down the monarchy. It forced the monarchy to remember that power without trust becomes isolation, while duty restrained by truth can still leave room for a family to stand together. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.